Hi everyone, this is the lecture to accompany Chapter 1 in your textbook. Please read Chapter 1 carefully as there's a lot of information in it that I simply don't have time to address in this lecture. Okay, let's find out exactly what critical thinking is. The word critical is often used to mean fault-finding or negative, as in, why do you have to be so critical of everything I say? But in philosophy, in academia, the term critical thinking means something very different. It means to think clearly and intelligently by using skilled judgment and observation. It's disciplined thinking that is governed by specific and clear intellectual standards. Critical thinking is not natural. It is learned. I like to describe humans as walking bundles of emotions and feelings with the occasional thought thrown in. How often do you hear someone say, or maybe you yourself say this when asked about a controversial topic? Well, I feel like, and then go on to describe your thoughts and opinions on that topic. You feel like, but what do you think? For the next week, listen carefully when people are giving you their opinion. They are very likely to say they feel something rather than think it. Since feeling is natural and thinking is hard, this class is likely to make your brain hurt, at least sometimes. But if you apply yourself, you're going to learn to think more clearly and rationally, see through really bad arguments, and become a better writer and speaker, and maybe make a difference in the world. And that is certainly something to strive for. So let's take a look at what we're going to be striving for in this class. What are the intellectual standards that we seek? First, clarity. We need to understand exactly what is being expressed. What exactly is this person saying? Sometimes people can be very vague and state things in a way that can be misunderstood or interpreted in a variety of different ways. Your job when looking at the claims that others make is to determine exactly what they are saying. Your job when making claims of your own is to be very, very clear in your language. Second, precision, exactness and attention to detail. What exactly is the problem? What exactly are the potential solutions to that problem? And what exactly are the benefits and drawbacks of those solutions? Third is accuracy. I love what the book says about this. No matter how brilliant you may be, you're almost guaranteed to make bad decisions based on false information. We've seen the rise of fake news sites on the internet over the past few years. Sadly, many people use that false information to come to conclusions, and that can lead to really bad decisions. Make sure your information is true, accurate, timely, and from good, solid sources. Fourth, relevance. Sticking to the point, not segueing to another point to distract from the issue in question. Again, this is very common, particularly in political discussions where a politician doesn't answer a direct question, but instead moves the conversation to a different topic that they want to discuss. Fifth, consistency. There is practical consistency where your ideas and your behavior match, and then there's logical consistency where your beliefs are consistent with each other. In the world at large, however, you'll see a lot of hypocrisy where people say one thing but do another, and irrational, inconsistent thinking. Honing your critical thinking skills will make it easier to see these things in yourself and in others. Sixth, logical correctness. To think critically, we need to be able to reason accurately from our claims and beliefs to come to good, solid, sound conclusions using good evidence. Seventh, completeness. Thinking is always better if one takes the time to explore all aspects of an issue. Don't jump to conclusions based on limited evidence. And finally, fairness. Being open-minded, impartial, and non-biased. This is extremely difficult for many people. None of us like to be wrong, and we fight and justify to maintain our ideas, even though many of those ideas are based on false or misleading information. We all have biases. We tend to stereotype people who are not like us. We identify what we call truth to be a part of our group's ideas. But Good critical thinking skills help us to see our own biases and recognize that fair-mindedness is essential. You're a community college student, and your main goal here is probably to get a good grade in this class, use that good grade to get your degree, and use that degree to get a good job, or a better job than the one you have now. If you're planning on being a journalist or a writer or an educator, you definitely need this class, but the authors of this textbook make a really good point about what a liberal arts education is really for, to teach you how to live well. In order to do that, you'll need good critical thinking skills so you can look at your beliefs, make sure they make sense and are based on logical, rational thought and good evidence. Look at and evaluate the ideas of others around you. Develop a belief system that's based in reality and leads to an ethical and meaningful life. It's a big job, but it's your job, and it's my job to help you. But of course, you will be using these skills in the workplace. Good critical thinking skills will help you solve problems, think creatively, analyze information, and draw appropriate conclusions, and then communicate those ideas clearly and accurately. Any employer would be thrilled to have someone with those skills working for them. In life, we often make decisions based on feelings rather than rational thought. Good critical thinking skills can help us avoid bad personal decisions, make more informed political decisions, and just generally have a better life. So, what gets in the way of good critical thinking? Being human. That's right, humans are complex creatures with lots of mental barriers that get in the way of clear thinking. Let's look at some of them. The first is egocentrism, or self-centeredness. Since it's easy and natural to see things from our own perspective, and very difficult to try to see things in any other way, all of us are egocentric to at least some degree. The world actually does revolve around us, or at least our little piece of the world does. However, even though it's a natural thing to be somewhat egocentric, it really does get in the way of good critical thinking. Self-interested thinking is the tendency to accept and defend beliefs that harmonize with one's areas of self-interest. For instance, if you're a business owner, you might think a reduction of business taxes is a great thing because it would mean you specifically would pay less taxes. If that's your main reason for wanting it, though, then that's egocentric. I'm not saying it's not a good thing. What I'm saying here is that we tend to want things that affect us positively, despite the fact that they may affect others negatively. Another way in which we are egocentric is through the superiority bias. This is a very common trait. Even if you don't think you have it, you probably do, at least in some respect. For instance, are you a better than average driver? You probably think so. 80% of people report that they are better than average at driving. But wait a minute. How can 80% of people be better than average? Only 50% of people can actually be better than average. So, at least 30% of those people are wrong. Which 30%? Not you, of course. See where I'm going with this? We can't all be superior, but we think that we are. Another thing that gets in the way of good critical thinking is group-centered thinking. As a species, we tend to relate more to others who look like us, talk like us, think like us. It's a survival mechanism that we've used for millennia. We were more likely to survive if we grouped together. Those group identities remain very strong to this very day and lead to things like group bias and conformism. Group bias is the tendency to see our group as superior to all other groups. This could be our nation, our race, our family, our political affiliation, our religion, or any other group to which we belong. We see people who do not fit into our group as outsiders and are more likely to treat them with suspicion. Conformism is our tendency to follow our crowd, to do what they do in order to be accepted. The book gives two very disturbing examples of this tendency. The first one is Asch's line experiment, where he showed test subjects a line of a certain length, then gave them 3 other lines and asked them which of those 3 lines was the same length as the first line he'd shown them. Now, if they were by themselves, almost all of them picked the correct answer. However, if they were with someone else and that someone else was a person whose secret job it was to convince them that they were wrong, almost a third of them were convinced to pick the wrong answer. So, we can obviously be swayed by others. An even more disturbing example is Milgram's shock experiment. You can read about it in the text, but the gist of it was that perfectly nice, normal people, like you and me, were coerced into giving what they thought were potentially deadly electric shocks to other people. Now, you might think that you would never do that, but you would probably be wrong. Something to think about. Unwarranted assumptions and stereotypes. Assumptions are beliefs that we hold about things that we simply accept as true. We've never had any proof that they were true. We just believe them. We take them for granted, and we don't really think about them very much. Much of our day is passed on us acting on assumptions, so they can certainly be necessary and useful if they are warranted, and that means based on good reasons. However, unwarranted assumptions are not based on good reasons. Some of our assumptions are based on stereotypes. This is where we draw conclusions about individual people, not based on their individual qualities or characteristics, but instead based on what we think is true about the groups to which they belong. And how do we arrive at stereotypes about groups? Often through a fallacy of reasoning known as hasty generalization. And that means coming to conclusion based on too little evidence. So it's kind of a cognitive circle of error. We draw a conclusion about a group based on the examples of one or two people, and then we apply that conclusion to every other individual in that group. So as you can see, it might be a good idea to rethink our ideas about other groups, as they're often based on assumptions that we've simply accepted as facts. Relativistic thinking is another way that we subvert critical thinking. It's the view that truth is a matter of opinion, that what's true for one person may not be true for another person, and that's okay. Now, in this day and age of people on totally opposite sides of the opinion spectrum, you might need to agree to disagree with a friend or relative in order to keep the peace, but that's not what I'm talking about here. Is the truth a matter of opinion? If you think so, you're guilty of subjectivism, which means that the truth is subjective and depends on whose truth it is. Cultural relativism holds that the truth is a matter of social or cultural opinion. The book uses the example of French culture, which holds that drinking wine is a good thing, and Iranian culture, which totally forbids its use. It's morally permissible in France, and immoral and impermissible in Iran. Who's right? Well, I certainly wouldn't want to get into an argument on that point. Obviously, most people don't think that all truth is relative, but many people do in some areas. But just because ethical questions are difficult to argue, that doesn't mean that we should assume that what's true is totally dependent on an individual's beliefs. Why is that? Well, let's look. Relativism doesn't promote tolerance. You might think that it does, as in live and let live, but look at it this way. If you live in an intolerant society, you are therefore morally obligated to be an intolerant person. And it makes it impossible for us to look at our own culture and point out things that we see as unacceptable, but are considered by a majority of citizens to be right. Cultural relativism states that we should go along with the majority, even if we're very troubled by doing that, because it's part of our culture and that's the way we do things. And it also makes it impossible to point out or criticize other cultures' customs and beliefs, like, say, slavery or female genital mutilation or child marriage, because, of course, if that culture thinks it's morally correct, who are we to say otherwise? The fact that there are deep disagreements in ethics does not mean that there is no objective moral truth. Ethics is not just a matter of opinion. Think about it. People vehemently disagree about questions like, is there a God? Is there life after death? Those kinds of things. But just because people can't come to agreement about it, that doesn't mean that there is not an objective truth about it. But, and this is a big but, that truth cannot be determined by opinion or consensus. The truth, what really is, what truly exists, sometimes exists outside of our ability to determine it. That having been said, the truth about many things is discernible. We know if something is true, if it accurately and precisely describes some part of our world, our universe, ourselves. We don't come to that knowledge through opinion. We come to it through observation, experimentation, and critical thinking. If nothing else, we should be more intellectually humble and open-minded and willing to look at our beliefs more critically and hear the arguments of others. One of the main ways in which we subvert critical thinking is through wishful thinking. In other words, believing what we suspect to be true or wish to be true without evidence, and often despite evidence to the contrary. Again, this error is rampant among humans. To quote Demosthenes, the easiest thing of all is to deceive oneself, for what a man wishes, he generally believes to be true. People have been inventing myths about the way they think the world works, or the way it should be, for millennia, and passing those ideas around. Look at this list of things that many people think have some truth to them. A person diagnosed with a fatal disease may have such a fear of death that they turn to an alternative form of treatment that has no scientific evidence that it will work. These are the lengths to which our brains will go in these circumstances, doing an end run around rational thinking because we really want something to be the case, or we truly believe that it is the case. So, here are some of the key intellectual traits that distinguish critical thinkers from everyone else on the planet. They state their claims as clearly and precisely as they can to make themselves clearly understood. They understand that humans are prone to thinking errors and try to avoid them. They admit that they don't know everything and they don't always insist on being right. They welcome criticism of their beliefs and are willing to revise those beliefs on the basis of good claims, evidence, and reasoning. They base their beliefs on facts, not on what they would like to be true. They are independent thinkers. They value true beliefs over comfortable ones. They have perseverance and are willing to take the time to search for the truth. Yes, it's hard. I teach some fun and easy classes, but this is not one of them. I have to work hard to make sure I understand the concepts I teach, and I'm always reviewing my notes and looking for examples of those concepts in the real world so that I can show you how critical thinking works in our lives and how a lack of critical thinking can be potentially damaging. But the rewards that come from utilizing good critical thinking skills are worth it. This is the end of the lecture on Chapter 1.